Thank you very much and welcome, everyone. Please note that Spanish translation is available on Zoom. To select translation services, please click on the globe icon on the Zoom screen and select Spanish. If during any public comments, a commenter is speaking Spanish or English, speaking participants may go to the globe and click English to listen to the translation of that comment. I'm going to ask Melissa Valle with the Office of Equity to please share this message in Spanish.
Gracias, Supervisor. Buenas noches a todos. Gracias por estar aquí, participar en esta reunión. Queremos recordarles que tenemos interpretación disponible. Pueden acceder a ella usando el globito en la parte inferior derecha del Zoom y seleccionar su idioma para escuchar en español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Melissa. I want to welcome you to tonight's District 2 Forum to discuss funding prioritization for the American Rescue Plan Act. My name is David Rabbitt, and I'm your Sonoma County 2nd District Supervisor. I am joined tonight with staff from Sonoma County's Office of Equity, Department of Health Services, Human Services Department, Upstream Investments, and Sonoma County Economic Board. Slide, please. We are here to listen and hear from you. How you, your family, or your organization or business was impacted by the pandemic, and how you believe the American Rescue Plan Act funds made available to the County of Sonoma could be best spent to mitigate those impacts and strengthen our community as a whole. Tonight, we will give a brief description of the American Rescue Plan Act, commonly known as ARPA, as well as have staff give a brief overview on the known impacts of the pandemic to Sonoma County's health, businesses, and community. We'll include a breakout session to hear from you and gather back at the end to share what we heard. So before we start, a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please place them in the chat. You can find that icon on the bottom of your screen as well. We'll try to answer those questions in chat, or we'll create a FAQ that we will post to the Sonoma County ARPA website if there are any unanswered questions at the end of the evening. And just so you know, that website is www.arpa@sonoma-county.org. And remember, we'll have time to hear your feedback during the breakout session, and we'll take notes on what we hear tonight as well. If you would like to attend the Spanish speaking breakout, just remain in the main room. You can decline your invitation to join the room, and a person will be in the main room to assist you in joining the Spanish speaking room. Thanks again for your patience as we review these items. Next slide, please. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 is a $1.9 trillion economic stimulus bill passed by Congress and signed by President Biden on March 11th of 2021. The intent was to accelerate the county's recovery from the economic and health effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the legislation that extended unemployment benefits and was responsible for direct payments to some individuals. It provided an emergency paid sick leave provision, as well as extended an increase in food benefits, among much more. There were also grants to small businesses and funding for education, health, housing, and transportation. $350 billion went to help state, local, and tribal governments bridge budget shortfalls and mitigate impacts of the pandemic within their jurisdictions. Sonoma County is receiving a direct allocation of $96 million over the years 2021 and 2022. Sonoma County's ARPA funds can be used in several ways, limited only by the federal statute. The Board of Supervisor wants to unify the criteria and processes on how best to distribute and use these funds through our strong community partnerships already in place. County departments submitted several proposals that were presented to the board in a workshop. These proposals align with a number of the required finding areas outlined in the Act. In addition to prioritizing how ARPA funding can be distributed, we will also be looking for potential alignment between community projects and department proposals. Most importantly, I and my fellow supervisors want equity to be at the front of our minds as we learn about and discuss possible funding priorities for ARPA. We all know that this pandemic did not affect everyone the same. The underserved communities, people of color, and people of low wage or low hour jobs were by far the hardest hit. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dania Candela, our Equity Program Manager with the Sonoma County Department of Health Services, to talk about the public health response to the pandemic. Dania?
Thank you, Supervisor Rabbitt. Good evening, everyone. As we have learned really through the pandemic and the presentations that we'll see thus far, research suggests that medical care only accounts for 10 to 20% of a person's health outcomes. And in the pandemic, we have seen that's no different. The social determinants of health, the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and their age, contribute to a wider set of forces and systems that shape the conditions of one's daily life. It accounts for 80 to 90% of all health outcomes. Next slide. This was no surprise when we looked at our numbers and our epidemiology data in case of trends in communities of color. In this graph, we can see the disproportionate impact of communities of color here in Sonoma County. Our Latinx community, ranking pretty high there on that yellow line that we see above, despite only making 20% of the population, were the hardest hit. Thereafter, we can see our Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native, Black, African American. These trends were similar across the state and nationwide. Next slide. We continue to monitor the disproportionate impacts in number of cases in people of color, and new developments have happened since the Delta surge. Most recently, in the past 60 days, we can see slightly different trends in terms of breakdown by race and ethnicity, but we are able to see that folks who are of those communities who've been historically impacted continue to carry the highest burden. Our green line now is representative of the Pacific Islander community, and we can see that on the graph above. Thereafter, a Black and African American community, and American Indian, Alaska Native, Latinx, White, Asian, and multiracial. It's important to know that these graphs take into account population size, and thereafter why we're able to look at disproportionality through epi data. Next slide.
Dania, can you pause for a second? I see on the chat that we're getting the translation challenge. I wonder if we could address that really quick before you move on.
Of course. You guys want me to do the other slides in Spanish while we address that? Will that be good use of the time?
What is the concern for the interpretation? Is it not audible?
It can't be heard, correct?
It can't be heard. Okay, let me see what I can do.
They said they can hear it now. They said it in Spanish. Ya se escucha.
Okay. All right.
So we're good?
Gracias, Davin.
Excellent, thank you.
Perfect. I'm going to, if needed, I can go back, of course, but also I'll pick up here and then we can go back as needed to show the other two slides. For this piece, really, this current slide that we're looking here in front of us, it tells us the story of the disproportionality in cases of hospitalizations and deaths. We can see Latinx residents account for 27.3% of the population, but roughly we're making up 42% of total hospitalizations and 31% of deaths. Asian, Black, African Americans, American Indian, Alaska Natives, Pacific Islander residents also overrepresented COVID-19 hospitalizations and deaths. An important fact here is that in 2020, life expectancy decreased by 2.1 years for Latinx residents, but 0.7, that was a decrease for white non-Hispanic residents. So it's incredible how we've been able to see, regardless of the disproportionality during COVID, but also how that has impacted those communities. Next slide. We're currently observing in this slide, we will make sure that we'll get updated numbers for you. I want to put that caveat on there that these are not the most recent ones on our vaccination efforts, but we are observing a 1.5 to 2 average increase each week and a total of number of residents who are fully vaccinated, specifically looking at our Latinx population and our multiracial groups who were behind in terms of vaccines. We're making progress at a healthy pace, and our focus continues to be in people who don't have access to a vaccine or may have questions about due to hesitancy in the way that because of the way that our systems impact them. We have more work to do, but we're definitely on our way. Next slide. And this last slide for my portion here that's in front of you tonight, it's looking at essential workers and how they are at greater risk of COVID-19 exposure. Subsequently, because of household transmission, many cases of the cases we saw were in household transmission. In the green line, we're able to see the folks in communities who were part of these occupations that identified as Latinx. In Sonoma County's COVID-19 case data, the majority of cases happened in agriculture, cleaning, janitorial sectors, food and beverage production, manufacturing, sanitation, public works, identified as Latinx. So with that completes my portion of the presentation. I'll pass it over to Supervisor Rabbitt.
Thank you very much, Dania. We appreciate that. Now I want to introduce Sonoma County Economic Development Board Director, Executive Director Sheba Pearson Whitley to talk about the pandemic's impact on businesses in Sonoma County. Sheba?
Thank you so much, Supervisor Rabbitt. So at the Economic Development Board, we understood really early on that we needed to have data inform how we were going to navigate in response to the pandemic, but also how we think about long-term recovery. So our department contracted with Dr. Rob Eiler out of Sonoma State University, as well as Dr. Marlene Orozco out of Stanford University. We have a tremendous amount of data and reports available from both of them, but in the interest of time, we really wanted to highlight some of the biggest impacts that we've seen with respect to our businesses. So in this first slide, this is representing jobs and occupations that are the most impacted with respect to COVID-19. I would make an assumption that there's probably no surprise here. We see food preparation and services related to food prep down by over 20%, as well as personal care services. So if you think about salons, barbers, and those types of services, down by over 20%, as well as sales by 12%. Office and administrative support, I think, is worth noting there, over 10%. And I want to call that one out specifically because I think a lot of people thought, oh, as long as people can work from home and telework, that they would not be impacted. But we see that early on, we saw over 10% loss in those jobs right here in our county. So the next slide, please. When we think about recovery, because people ask us all the time, when are we going to be done with this thing of COVID? You know, when are we going to be out of the woods? We recognize that certainly we're not there yet. We're making a lot of strides in the right direction, but we're not there yet. So we did ask Dr. Eiler to do some modeling on behalf of the Economic Development Board to understand what the projections would look like with respect to recovery and to help us identify which were going to be potentially the most vulnerable occupations moving forward. So we see that even by the year 2024, the projection is that we'll still be over 9% decrease in 2024 in occupations and food service. And so for context, when we think about recovery, it is if we could rewind the clock all the way back before COVID-19, if we go back to the fall of 2019, how long is it realistically going to take us as a community to get back to where we were before this thing COVID happened? So by 2024, the projection is still accommodation and food services will be down by 9%. Education services will still be down by over 7%. We are continuing to hear about the challenges with respect to education services, teachers, childcare, and we all recognize that those challenges certainly impact people's ability to come back to work. We continue to hear about that. So again, there's a ton of data out there, but we know that by and large, a lot of the people who actually work in these jobs are BIPOC community members. And so again, this is just one more data set that demonstrates that disproportionate impact. And I wanted to just highlight that so that as we move into the breakout sessions, you'll have all this great data that really demonstrates what the impacts have been in our community. So with that, I will turn it back over to Supervisor Rabbitt. Thank you.
And thank you, Sheba. Very much appreciate that. I want to introduce the Assistant Director of Sonoma County Human Services, Oscar Chavez, to get a better understanding of the pandemic's impact on our community as a whole. Oscar?
Thank you so much, Supervisor. Can we go on to the previous slide? As the supervisor noted in his opening remarks, the pandemic did not affect everyone in the same way. And part of our work is to better understand the ways in which our communities were disproportionately impacted. We know from the Portrait of Sonoma report published in 2014 that not all residents have access to the same opportunities to meet their full potential, and that health, education, and income disparities exist depending on where one lives in our county. We also know that these disparities have real individual and community impacts on health and prosperity, as evident in the health and economic data that was shared by Dania and Sheba. A new update of the Portrait of Sonoma report will be released next month with new data for Sonoma County. We will use this new report as an additional data resource to inform our community's recovery efforts. The Portrait of Sonoma uses a Human Development Index to assign a score to each of our community's census tracts on a scale of 0 to 10. 10 being the highest, meaning that census tracts with a higher score have access to more opportunity. We can use these data to compare differences in opportunity between census tracts and explore ways to grow opportunities in communities with a lower Human Development Index score. And we can do this at a countywide level and within each of our county cities and towns. Next slide. During the first shelter-in-place health order, applications for CalFresh, this is California's food stamp program, nearly doubled in Sonoma County compared to the same month in the prior year. Monthly applications continue to remain high at above 2,000, illustrating the ongoing need for food assistance supports. Next slide. Want to highlight and let you know that calls to 211, the county's information and referral center, also saw a significant call volume requesting support for housing and rental assistance, healthcare, food and meal assistance, as well as utility payment assistance. The areas where 211 has seen the biggest increase in calls compared to pre-pandemic numbers has been in requests for income supports. Next slide. We also want to highlight some of the current challenges with access to childcare. Parts of Santa Rosa, Sonoma Valley, and West County, along with small areas of Windsor, Petaluma, and Roanoke Park, have inadequate access to childcare. Many parts of our community suffer from childcare deserts. These are called deserts because they represent areas where childcare demand exceeds the space available for in-state childcare programs. The pandemic has put huge strains on our childcare sector, as illustrated in this slide. And in a survey conducted by First Five late last year, many in-home childcare providers stated they will not be reopening, making it much more difficult for parents to return to work, especially those that work in non-traditional work hours. We know that, prior to the pandemic, we already had a learning gap between our Latinx dual language learners and white preschool age children. And the loss of childcare slots and limited access to broadband and technology has exacerbated the learning gap between our lower income households and those living in rural parts of our community. I'll now return it back to Supervisor Rabbitt.
Thank you, Oscar. Appreciate that. Now I want to introduce Melissa Valle, our Communications and Engagement Coordinator with the Office of Equity, to speak of the board's commitment to equity and what it looks like in this process. Melissa?
Thank you, Supervisor, and perfect. So as you have seen, the previous slides have shown us the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on people of color. But we know that the pandemic didn't create this. In our country, people of color have long experienced differences in access to resources and treatment by our systems and laws. And as a result, Race is still the single biggest indicator for how healthy, wealthy, and well-educated someone is. And there is really no scientific explanation for that difference. Really, the explanation lies in our history and our policies that created and used race to justify many actions by our governments, including the genocidal displacement of Native Americans, the enslavement of Africans, and granting of US citizenship only to people who were deemed white by law. So race was used as the earliest basis for creating distinctions between people, and that has resulted in distinct access to rights and privilege in this country. So now if you're thinking this is, ancient history, let me tell you these examples are not so far back in our history. And actually the limiting citizenship to white people ended only in 1952. So there are people who are still alive who, couldn't become citizens if they weren't white. And so we see that we are still challenged by the impacts of those political decisions to this day. So now if we look at this graphic, as you see, we've moved from explicit racism, which was slavery, Jim Crow era, citizenship for white people only, to implicit racism. And what that means is that many explicitly racist laws and policies and practices were overturned and became race-neutral laws, which is often the norm. But it is important to know that these claims of race neutrality only mask the discrimination, and the outcome is still that structural and institutional inequities continue to this day. So what do? We have to start seeing and addressing race as the biggest indicator to measure well-being in our communities, and also proactively advance racial equity through data-driven strategies and processes that invite the communities made vulnerable by our history to the table. In this way, the county recognizes the responsibility of governments to address the harms caused by past policies and the need to create equitable outcomes for people of color in our community. Next slide, please. So what do equitable outcomes look like, or how do we get there? To start, we have to look at our county's definition for equity, which recognizes that a path to different outcomes lies in new processes, a process that creates new spaces for people who are closest to the challenges to help us find and implement solutions to those same challenges. And we know, and you have seen tonight, that our data shows the dramatically different outcomes for Latinx, Black, Asian, and Indigenous people in our community during this pandemic. Next slide, please. So based on that definition and our understanding of the data, our proposal here provides a process solution. We have created an external equity work group made up of people who have been living and seeing these structural and institutional inequities, and as a result can best help us to flip those switches, make those tweaks, and elevate the great ideas and wisdom that come from those lived experiences. So this group builds on the lessons and the best practices from the Latinx and now Equity Health Work Group, and creates important connections between the communities lived and therefore deeper understanding of the impact of the pandemic and the ways in which we as the county will need to direct or redirect our efforts. And in this case, ARPA funding to those members of our community who experience, again, the greater negative impacts during this time. So the Equity Work Group is made of 15 people who represent different communities who have been greatly impacted by COVID, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, members of the LGBTQI+ community, people who have experienced houselessness, and hold other intersectionalities. So their names are Chelsea Rose, Daniela Bravo, Yvette Minor, Faith Ross, Grace Chung Schulman, Gregory Fearon, Hector Velasquez, Herman J. Hernandez, John Wilding, Mary Sandberg, Patrick McDonald, Rebecca Samet, Regina Brennan, Ronit Rubinov, and Sandra Uribe. They will help us develop community priorities and accountability metrics, and will also engage with community-based organizations to ensure broad access to these funds. And will also be critical to the implementation of the equity and results-based accountability approach, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides, so that the excellent team at upstream investments in the Human Services Department, working with our office, will bring to ensure that we take every opportunity to embed racial equity principles through the uses of the ARPA money and measure its impact. All of this also in alignment with the county's racial equity and social justice strategic plan pillar. So these town halls are also structured in a way to ensure that our larger community has the benefit of seeing and more deeply understanding this proportionality. And we know that the pandemic has impacted every person in our community. We've all been impacted by it. But we are hopeful that as we rely on the richness of data and lived experiences, we can focus and direct ARPA money to the places where it is most needed by working together. So thank you for being here. And now you will hear from Oscar Chavez about that results-based accountability framework.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. And just really quickly, I want to let our attendees know where we are in the process. We are in the process of gathering data, holding in partnership with the district supervisors, a townhouse to gather
Oscar,
input.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. It seems like we're having some issues with the interpretation.
Hey, Melissa, what are the challenges specifically?
¿Será que nos pueden poner, por favor, en el chat cuál es el problema, si es de conexión o es la traducción? Okay. They're saying it's looking a little bit, it's better now.
Sorry, I was able to jump on briefly, but I could hear if they mute the original audio, I think that they'll be able to understand the Spanish version better, because I think that's where the cutout comes off and on.
Thank you. So, nos dice Héctor que para escuchar mejor en español, podemos, en el globito donde escogen el idioma, pueden poner la opción de Mute Original Audio, que va a eliminar el audio en inglés y así pueden escuchar en español. Y nos dice Ana que algunas se corta o hay interferencia. So, veamos a ver si eliminando el audio en inglés podemos escuchar mejor en español. Y si no, nos pueden dejar saber y tratamos de arreglar. Gracias.
Gracias, Melissa. This is a new issue that's come up for us. So we are, here to gather information from our community. We're also looking at various different reports and data points to be able to compile and present to our Board of Supervisors the best picture we can present of need and how communities have been impacted during COVID. After that process, once the Board of Supervisors approves the funding areas, then we will be putting together a request for proposal that we will also be providing training and technical assistance to ensure that our community nonprofits understand how to fill out the application, or if they need additional supports. We want to make sure that we can have a low barrier application process to make sure that everybody who has a proposal has the ability to submit one. We also are going to be implementing the results-based accountability framework. This is a tool that we will utilize during the duration of the ARPA funding to better quantify and understand how these investments were able to improve the lives of people. We want to understand how many people were served, how better off they are, and whether or not these investments really ensured an equitable recovery. As part of that process, we will be providing and collecting quarterly data that will be reported back to the Board of Supervisors and to the community through a public-facing scorecard. And for those organizations that are challenged with some of the program delivery, we're going to provide some training and technical assistance, because we want to make sure that these dollars, this is a unique opportunity that we have. We want to make sure that this investment truly goes to ensure an equitable recovery. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for us to work with our community partners to provide the technical assistance and to ensure that we are adequately monitoring the performance of those contracts over time. At the end of the ARPA process, we will also be generating an evaluation of the total investments to really understand what worked and what we can learn from this experience to ensure that we can strengthen the quality of our programs moving forward here in Sonoma County. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Supervisor Rabbitt.
No, thank you very much, Oscar. And before we go into breakout rooms, I'd just like to say thank you for those presentations. They're sobering, but I think again, the intent of this evening is to hear from you with that as background and your own experiences, and we can do that in the breakout rooms here in a minute. I just want to say that while the dollar amount seems very large, we all know that the needs are much greater, and with those limited dollars, they really need to be directed to those most adversely impacted by the pandemic. I do think that from what we saw as well, that the presentation showed us again, the fundamental issues that these ARPA funds, again, albeit one-time dollars, can start to lay a foundation to bolster access to opportunities, access to health access, quality employment, fair wages, affordable housing, affordable childcare, as Oscar mentioned, and access to quality food and nutrition, those basic tenets of life that we need to make sure each and every citizen of Sonoma County has access to. It helps raise all of us and it strengthens our community. So with that, I want to turn it over back to Sheba Pearson-Whitley to help us find our breakout rooms and maybe give us a little direction on how we get there. Sheba?
Thank you, Supervisor Rabbitt. So I want to echo everything that you just said. We've seen a ton of data. I know that it can be overwhelming at times. So we will continue to make all this information available to you, but we also know that there are people connected to all those data points. There are community members that are comprised of all those data points that we have seen, and that you all have a great deal of information and knowledge based on your experience, based on what you've been hearing, seeing, and feeling within the community, to share that with us. So that's the purpose of the breakouts. You see the questions right here. You will have a facilitator in your breakout, as well as a note taker. All the information that you provide is going to be put into report, and we're going to be giving that to the Board of Supervisors. So that's why your feedback and your input is so critically important. We know that this is one-time funding, and we want to be very, very thoughtful and hear from you as to what the response should be. What is working well? Where do we still need room for improvement or more investment? So we're going to be moving into breakouts. And then when we come back, there will be designated reporters to report out on what you've heard in those groups. If you need to be in the Spanish room, when you see the invitation to join a meeting, do not accept that. I know that Oscar is going to translate that for me, but if you need Spanish, you want to be in the Spanish breakout room, do not accept the invitation. Stay in the main room and we will move you over. But everyone else, we look forward to hearing the report outs, and thank you so much for your participation.
Un recordatorio.
Go ahead, Melissa.
No, I know what you're going to say, so you do.
Para los participantes en español, no acepten la invitación para un cuarto y si quédense aquí, vamos a participar juntos en español momentáneamente.